What's going on, Spitfires? Welcome back to another episode of the Spitfire podcast. We are a bunch of Spitfires hoping to inspire the Spitfire within you. And today I am joined by a fellow Spitfire coach. She is not the Spitfire coach. I mean, I got the t-shirt and all, but we are talking about the stuff that is impacting you in the workplace and outside of it. We just were geeking out ahead of time about the incoming workforce tsunami. It is as scary as you think it is. And depending on where you are in the wave, you might be sailing to your next opportunity, or you might have that wave crash on you and take you out. I am joined by my good friend, Amy. Amy, I didn't even ask you how to pronounce your last name. So,
It's Can.
Amy can. She can do it. Amy, tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Sure. So I was in corporate in marketing for more than 20 years. And in my last role, I was there for a decade, helping grow a company that was in digital media and built the marketing department up. And then one day the tsunami crashed on me. And, there was actually a lot of lead up to it, but I was laid off along with most of the senior team. And it was a really startling thing for me to be back looking for a job. At the time, I was in my late 40s, and I felt I had given so much to this company, and new management came in, and it was a whole new ballgame. It led me on this whole path of figuring out what was next. And I think, like many people, I grew up, sort of in this framework, college, and then I got a graduate degree, and, I was living within the confines of expectation. And, my husband actually said to me when I was in the, post-layoff phase of, said, you can do whatever you want. And I was like, what are you talking about? And eventually I got there. So I was doing a lot of work on myself, and I really enjoyed that. And I found meditation and, all this self-help stuff. And I realized, it took me a very long time for the penny to drop, that I could help other people with the things I was learning. And, I looked into coaching, and I saw coach training, and I was like, oh my God, like this would be so amazing because I can train keep doing what I'm doing. And, so that's really how I became a coach. And then for coaching, I started off working exclusively with women, and it's all based on my experience, right? I was in a tech company. I was on senior teams with men mostly. And it was very difficult to be a young mother at the time. Working my way through with men who didn't have the same responsibilities at home that I did. So I was helping work with emerging women leaders on some of the challenges they had in, coming up through a company. And now it's more broad, because one of the things I've realized is that you've got to work with men too if we're going to change the gender equity picture. So not that I don't love working with men, but I think, it's about everybody rising up. So that's what I do. I work in companies. I work on emotional intelligence, building up emotional intelligence, and using some of my background as context, helping people communicate better.
Awesome. And what a great segue for the topic that we're diving into today, because there is inequity around our current experience working from home. The pandemic has created new constraints, a whole different level of inequity. So you were talking about a study that really stuck out to you as like, whoa, we got to focus on this. What is that study?
Yes. So I recently saw data, and I will find the attribution towards the end, because I hate to not give credit where it's due. But I saw this survey that basically said 1 in 4 employees is planning on leaving their company when the pandemic is over. And so that first was like, holy cow, that's a lot of people that are leaving companies. And HR and these companies, senior teams better be prepared. But the thing that's even more astounding is when you look just at millennials and just at women, or actually parents with children who are learning from home, that number goes to 1/3, 1 in 3, which is just an astounding number. And I think, obviously when you're talking with parents, there's so much data that if you overlay it, probably leads to the majority of the parents being women who would be leaving their jobs. But millennials too, I mean, that's the majority of the workforce, right? So when you bring that to 1/3 and you couch it in that millennial age band, it's going to be an incredible loss for companies.
Yeah. So if we look at the tsunami, we have kind of, let's look at how a tsunami is made. There is usually some sort of turbulence under the surface. So
Right.
an earthquake, which could be the pandemic, or it could have happened long before that was building pressure related
Yep.
to situations that weren't working for parents, situations that weren't working for millennials, situations that weren't working for people of color, situations that weren't working for women. And really it's everybody who isn't in the majority stakeholder decision maker. And what are those impacts that have been building over time?
Yeah, I mean, and it's incredible. I think also about a tsunami, right? The waves go out right before it crashes back in. So there's this like build of energy. And, a lot of this, so burnout is the most immediate reason why I think people are planning on leaving. But the buildup is people who are planning on leaving before. There were a whole bunch of people, and I think it's pretty well documented, the number of people who were planning on leaving their job, say 2019, and then I was going to say the tsunami, the pandemic hit, and people dug their heels in because it wasn't a good time to leave. And in fact, turnover rates, I believe in 2020, were the lowest. And now, that the it's all come back. The pandemic ends, and it's like, right?
Yeah.
The crash and the burnout. I mean, again, like there's so much data around what this period, the last year, has caused for people, for so many reasons. I mean, obviously there's the toll on health and family and relationships, caused by people getting sick. I mean, that's one thing. The stress of having children at home and trying to do multiple jobs. I think it was an extra 15 hours a week of work that women specifically were taking on in home care, child care, on top of their jobs. You had people who were, you had furloughs and layoffs going on. And then you have people the people that remain having to pick up the slack. So there's even more work. The breaks of commuting are gone. You like roll out of bed and go to your desk, right? And then, just the stress of working from home because it may be a space issue, and then inequities come up, and, and on and on and on. So, yeah, I mean, it's real, and how companies are going to deal with it is going to be really interesting. And I think, I keep saying this, if you look at take millennials, what they're really interested in out of their job, out of their companies, development, professional development ranks really high up there. And then when you take this whole idea of like the burnout, to me, the solution of coaching and leadership development and professional development starts sounding pretty good, because, when you coaching in particular, as coaches, we coach the whole person. It's not just about, coaching skills. It's about dealing with what's underneath and what's going on. And so there's an element of wellness in there. And certainly it's about support. So to me, there seems to be a huge opportunity for looking more at coaching and how that can help support employees and hopefully keep them at your company, retain them.
Yeah. I mean, what I see is this kind of reshaping of what professional development is. And at the core of it, it's an investment. It's seeing the employee as an asset rather than a replaceable cog or manpower that you can just sub in. And I think that even shifting that mentality and that mindset of anyone can be replaced at any time to we are looking for future talent and we believe that you have potential and we are going to invest in that process. Back in the day, not even 5-10 years ago, only the C-suite had access to executive coaching. And I think that created an even larger disparity in the pipeline of leaders.
No question. And I think, if it's hard, people get very uncomfortable. I've heard a few of us say, talk about the good things that have come out of the pandemic, and obviously not to negate all the really difficult hardships that people have faced. But on the more positive side, I think it's really accelerated this idea of human-centric leadership, which, it was there before. And, you had pledges, and you could say the same thing about, equity in the workplace, whether it's gender or people of color or any kind of, biases, and bringing more equity to the leadership table. But looking at human-centric leadership, where it isn't the cog in the wheel idea, but it is really valuing the individual and the contributions that people make, when you embrace their whole self and all of that. I think it's really accelerated during the pandemic as people have no choice but to get to know the people they work with more, to see what they're going through. Empathetic leadership has become really big, having compassion, all these really important skill, emotional intelligence skills.
Yeah, I also noticed in the pandemic how ill-equipped a lot of people are, myself included at times, of just being able to admit when you don't have the answers, or admit when you need a break, or admit that you're not a superhero and you don't have, constantly charging batteries. And I, we talk about vulnerability in the office, but I think it's beyond that. It's just the honesty of limitations and thresholds. And I don't think people really felt comfortable having those conversations until now.
Agreed. And I would question whether everybody does, but I think those that do, yeah. But those that do, in a way, like I hate to say win, but I think what that does for your team, if you're a leader who's able to say, like, I'm taking a break because I need a mental health day, right? You're modeling this behavior that says it's okay. We all have this. And, if you need a break, you should take it too. And this is going to be required. I mean, again, going to that, tsunami, this is what's going to determine whether people stay or go.
Definitely. And there is such a contrast of talking the talk and actually walking the talk. Yeah. And I think that is what a lot of employees are now aware of, as this is just a bunch of lip service that's for the outside exterior versus the internal corporate culture that I experience on a daily basis.
I no question. I completely agree with you.
So there's also this question of, this has come up because I brought this study up with a client. We were talking about it. And my client said, well, the grass is not usually greener. So what would you say to your client? Meaning, yeah. I can leave this situation, but what's going to ensure that this is going to be a better opportunity?
Yeah. So what I would say is, what is what you're in, right? What you're experiencing now, what that looks like, but you can't predict what's on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. So you do your due diligence, you find out as much as you can, but what's the worst that's going to happen? I mean, it sort of seems like if where you are today and I'm so glad you brought this up because I'm pretty passionate about this too. If where you are today is not where you want to be, you have a choice. You can stay and just suck it up, or find something else. And I say I'm passionate because that company that I talked about being with for a decade, I had some good times, but no question I should have left sooner. And I think that's true for most people. I didn't need to wait to be kicked out. And, one of the problems often is that you're go, 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 and you don't have enough time to think, and fear comes up, and you're comfortable, and you kind of are like, better the devil I know.
Mm-hmm.
But to use coach language, how true is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that icky space of tolerating situations that aren't working for you. And while it's not painful per se, it's that constant rub against things that aren't working that's dulling you out, that's exhausting you, that's making you less efficient, and hence burnout.
And draining. I mean, it's so draining, And I think, I also have come across so many of my clients that it takes a long time to get past, the fear, and there's so many reasons why not to go. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You can come up till the cows come home.
Yeah.
Money. And I really like the people I work with. I hear that one a lot. And it's like, so like, does that mean you can't stay in touch? If they're good relationships, don't you keep them?
Well, it's almost like being in the trenches. Like when you're in such an awful situation, you have the camaraderie of like your fellow soldiers, and you're in the muck with each other.
Right.
But it's almost like when you have distance from it, you realize you were in survival mode, and you were actually feeding that drama cycle.
Absolutely. And again, it goes to that, like, just draining energy, because it's such a negative cycle, right? It really, it doesn't help anybody. And it's always a question now, now that I know better, that I ask is like, is it serving you? Is it helping you move forward, or is it pulling you down?
Right. And I think you brought up an interesting point that has been ringing true for me lately, which is when we go through an educational system where we have clear expectations of what we're supposed to do in order to be successful, and then we work in companies where we have very clear expectations and roles and delineation and hierarchy. When we think about choice, when we think about, well, what does serve me and what do I want, it is such a foreign concept, because we have been in this, how do I serve you so that I get recognition in the way that I'm supposed to?
It's so crazy because, it wasn't until I was, of a certain age, until I learned all this really fundamental stuff, right? Like, yes, you actually always have a choice. And how often do we say, like, I just have no choice, or I didn't have a choice? And it's like, yay, challenge that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you, as you said, when you're in it, and until you're almost re-educated, you are like in this, you've got blinders on to some extent. And sometimes it's just, it may not change what you do. It might not change your action. So if it's staying at a company as an example, right? So maybe you'll still stay at your company, but you've seen it as a choice to stay rather than defaulting because you have no choice, right? And it's much more empowering.
Absolutely. Well, it's the difference between being powerless and allowing someone else to dictate your future, or being empowered to steer your own plan and path.
Right.
And then I go back to, well, who benefits by us not doing that? And these companies that realistically, they do not want empowered leaders, because they have a system at the top that reinforces it. There are more and more companies that are waking up to this. But what would you say to someone that is working in a system like that, where no matter what they do, how empowered they are, the choices that they're making, and they're like, if only I could do these 3 things, everything would be better? What would you say to them?
Yeah. It is about asking the questions, right? So, how are you feeling? What do I often find it does really come back to aligning your values. Like, what's great about where you are? Like, come up with, and if you can't come up with anything, then you really start entertaining, okay, well, what does great look like? What are your values? And what would it look like to be in a company that honored those values, right? And that was aligned with those values? What would that look like for you, right? And I think, it's sort of, it's like that chipping away at the things that the blinders that people put up.
Yeah. Well, blinders are great when you're a horse and you're running
Right.
in the Kentucky Derby, but not so great if you want to enjoy the view and have a manageable pace.
Right. And those horses, they're running on a track in a circle.
And they're still getting hurt.
Right.
And very
dirty.
Going,
right?
And they keep going. Yeah. So let's go back to the workplace tsunami. So 1 in 3 of millennials parents expected to leave. 1 in 4. What are the telltale signs that you were a company on the wrong side of the tsunami?
You got to be paying attention to your employees. So if you haven't heard your employees kind of saying that they're having a tough time, then you're not listening, right? Because I think everybody's having that. If your employees aren't taking some time off, shame on you, right? I mean, people are needing breaks. And I think, one of the things I've heard is in companies where there's no vacation policy, right? A lot of tech companies, for example, it's open. You take as much time as you need. People aren't taking the time. So I think taking, when there's no place to go, right? It can be really hard for people to recognize that, just because you're not going on vacation doesn't mean you shouldn't take the time. So companies need to be paying attention to people taking time off. And if they're not, put something in place that, maybe it's like every other Friday or, something that requires people to take some time. So I think it's the taking the temperature of your employees and knowing how they're feeling. I think to some extent, all companies are going to have some of it because it's just where we are right now. It's what you do about it. Another stat I saw that was really interesting that kind of plays into talent development is this one I remember is DDI came out with their leadership forecast, not exact name, close, 2021, where they surveyed leaders globally, a lot of them. And the number one concern that CEOs had was developing the pipeline. And that was 55%, I believe, of CEOs said that was their number one concern. That was the highest rank. So again, great to see. You want to move people up. People are moving out. I think there's a great deal of opportunity for companies to be paying attention and thinking about what their employees need right now.
I've also seen the lack of clarity and transparency for career mapping.
Yeah.
They're like, we want to build leaders, but we're not going to tell you how.
Right. Where do I go? And I'm going to throw another one on the pile, sponsorship, right? Especially for people of color, women, people in who are minority populations in companies.
So let's define what sponsorship is. What do you see sponsorship as?
So sponsorship is instead of mentorship where you are helping somebody like through counseling, say, or, working with them. Sponsorship is talking about them. So it's really raising their profile in the organization so that they get more opportunities for cool projects, whatever it may be, opportunities ultimately for promotion. But it's really about raising somebody's profile. you know.
What do you see the difference between sponsorship and advocacy?
Advocacy feels to me it's more like a group rather than an individual. Like I mean, you can advocate on someone's behalf, and I think that's part of sponsorship. In some ways, I think sponsorship's broader in that it can be, you know, literally talking about somebody to the CEO and saying, you know, there's this person I've noticed in a meeting who they're really bright. We should consider them for whatever, right? And that's an example of sponsorship. And it can be bigger, like, and more formalized. But I think that the mentorship is the bigger, and sorry, going back to your question, I think that they're very aligned versus mentorship, which is good, but doesn't always have.
It's usually behind closed doors. It's that one-on-one. Yeah. I think, and I'm glad that we brought this up, because I think that mentorship becomes kind of that like drop box for all things under take care of my career path with someone who's more experienced. But to have those specific functions defined is going to look very different for each person and who they pick or point out to help them along their way. And you should absolutely have a mentor or mentors. You should absolutely have an advocate, and that's usually probably going to come from your people manager. And then sponsorship is not necessarily something that you should be soliciting, but something that should be part of the team culture.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a direct line, right? Anybody can sponsor somebody. You know, anybody in a senior position can sponsor somebody that they think has talent, has potential, you know, and you can have more than one sponsor. Hopefully you do.
So this sounds like a really great challenge for our listeners that are in senior leadership or in any type of leadership position, to look for 3 people around you that need some hyping up, that need to have their story told, that need to have a little spotlight shown on them for all the great work they're doing.
Yes, please. Yeah. Yay! I mean, it's so important. And it's really important, you know, that the more power you have, obviously, the more weight it has. So it's not necessary. I mean, it's great when women sponsor women, but men, please look for the people whose voices may be a little more hushed.
Yeah. Right? And if you can't think of anybody, then you need to start having different conversations.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're there.
Yes. You've just been in your little cubby hole.
Yeah, right.
Come out wherever you are.
I love that though.
But imagine what a shift that would be if, rather than communication between leaders being performance improvement or quotas or, you know, forecasting based on the position of the company and market share, it actually was a highlight reel of all of the awesomeness happening with their employees.
Oh my God. And isn't bing. I mean, and some of that is, I think, the shift that I hope, I'm an eternal optimist, that we're making right now, you know?
I think so. I think the flip for consciousness has happened. And the great thing is, once you know, you can unknow. So it's not like we learn this stuff and then we're going to regress back to old ways. And I think there's a hunger for it. There is an appetite for it. And there's a palate for it.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, it's interesting what you just said reminded me of, again, I wouldn't say, you know, out of unrest, right? Hopefully comes change. And we certainly saw that this year. And going back to, you know, even what I was saying about, you know, the acceleration of things and walking the talk. I think, you know, there was a lot of lip service given before 2020 to a lot of things, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equity, but there were some really big step changes because of George Floyd and the other, you know, all the racial injustice that we saw in 2020. You know, in addition to other things like budgets for employee resource groups, right? So if they even had them before, I know one company I'm working with has a new head of DEI, and he said like his goal for the year was to have, I think he said 4 ERGs up and running, and by the end of the year he had 7. I mean, and he's reporting on it to the CEO. Again, another clue, right, about the importance comes from the top, and if there isn't accountability, this stuff doesn't happen. So sorry, I'm going in a little tangent, but I think it's really important that if you really want to get things done, it gets ingrained in KPIs and bonuses, and you really put your money where your mouth is, and that's how you kind of build this cultural change.
And it has to happen on all levels. Like, this isn't, I just put a memo out and we are the most diverse company in the world.
Right. And that was 2019.
Right. It totally was. And into 2020 a little bit too. Yes. But also, it isn't up to your employees to fix your company. And it isn't up for minorities to fix your company.
Oh my gosh. Right. And what I'm seeing that's really interesting is when these ERGs are set up and they're really able to influence the company at a higher level. So it's goes both ways, right? They're given the ability to make change or to influence change, and they're coming to the table with some really impactful ideas on how to do it, and it gets ingrained in everything. Right. It's not just about like, we have this nice little group over here. I mean, it goes into product changes and policy changes, and it can be so powerful.
So here's my question. We're forecasting a workplace tsunami. What is the next trend that you predict that will follow that?
After the tsunami.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it's not a short-lived thing, right? But I think the talent wars are going to be huge.
Battle royale for the talent.
I mean, again, like that was there was so much talk about that pre-pandemic. If you have all these people leaving, again, like huge. I know that the soft skills. I don't really like that term, hence my air quotes. But skill development is huge. Technical is part of it, but soft skills, emotional intelligence, also huge. One of the things that I saw that was because I work in the emotional intelligence space, it was a really interesting point for me, was with AI coming on board and being integrated in everything, the need for EI is even greater, because those are the skills that AI doesn't have yet, right? So
and it's got all the bias that comes along with it.
Well, right. I mean, you're going to need to imbue, right? So I think that's some of it. I think is the war for talent, talent development, and I think a real focus on retention. It's expensive to lose people.
It really is. I don't think people realize how expensive it is until they look at their balance sheet at the end of the year, like, whoa, where did we spend all of our money?
It's like way more expensive to hire someone new than to work on developing someone you have. And I think one other thing is, that this whole idea that with hybrid, workplaces or fully remote in some cases, where talent comes from, boundaries are going to be different. So, where you needed to recruit locally before, you have a broader field, but the same goes for employees. That potentially, if I'm in New York, it's not really an issue if I work in LA. So,
very true. The lines don't even exist anymore.
Yeah,
they've been redrawn and erased and thrown up in the air.
It's crazy, and I think there's just so many unknowns as well. Like I think it's crazy. And I'll put one more out there. The role of the CHRO, or whatever the title is, of the senior HR people, um, is just going to be much, much greater. And talk about like getting, I think there was a lot of complaining about having a seat at the table. Oh, I think that's going to change, because the issues about workplace and wellness and mental health, diversity, all these things, culture, they're really at the fore post-pandemic. So, yeah.
Well, I'm excited for the future. I'm waiting with my popcorn to see the talent battles that are about to ensue, the talent wars, whether they're bots or they're like sumo suits, who knows? It's gonna be amazing. So if people are curious to learn more about how they can work with you, whether they're a corporation or they're an individual within the corporation, how can they find you?
Very simple. amycancoaching.com. So it's AMYKAN coaching.com. My website and all the information is there.
Fantastic. And if you had to we love nuggets. So if you had to send one nugget into the universe for everyone to absorb and put in their toolkit, what would it be?
Listen to people. Listen to what people are saying. We were talking about it, before. Don't talk so much.
Why are you talking?
I don't mean that directly. But yeah, it's true, right? If you listen to what people are trying to tell you, you get to the root of a lot of it.
It's not about you. Just listen.
Just listen. Yeah.
Awesome. Amy, this was so much fun. I love like giggling and learning and geeking out on leadership and culture and DEI. Like, it's awesome. Thanks for spending time with the Spitfire podcast. Make sure you guys are subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all that fun stuff. You can head on over to spitfirepodcast.com for so many more interviews for people just as awesome as Amy. And make sure you're subscribed, leave a review. And for all the Spitfires out there, you keep being awesome.
Thanks, Lauren.